Are you going to give me a cue?
It's good.
Oh, okay.
I played an evil reindeer.
I always wanted to play pretend.
Soupy Sales School of Hangers and Drama.
It's gonna be fun for me because I like talking about acting. And I love acting.
Oh, I actually enjoy Hurt Feelings.
There's a TV series called Supergirl that had a Superman. I didn't even get to read for that.
Or they're scared of me, one of the two.
Correct?
What the hell's a monologue?
Is that Julie Andrews?
I'm passionate about that.
Again, my wig came off. And I put it back on and it was on backwards.
Show must go on.
Well, hello and welcome to Inside the Eclipse Studio. My name is Mike Fleming, and this is a continuing series, kind of sporadically dated, where we interview actors and artists and writers and producers, mainly from the Santa Clarita Valley and theater. And I'm really excited today because I'm about to interview a man I've known for many years, and you know, when there's no secrets, the interview gets really interesting sometimes. So I'd like to introduce you at this time to Phil Lantis.
Hi, everyone.
So Phil and I met through work at the City of Santa Clarita in arts and events. He was my boss, and I must say he was very tolerant, and but also a very creative individual. So if you don't mind, let's start with that. How did you, I know that you have a film background, so can you tell us briefly how you started in that?
Sure. Well, in high school, I found theater, which, of course, like most kids that had tried athletics and wasn't very good at, you know, the school stuff, I was looking for that thing that was me, and I found theater and speech, competitive speech, and did choir, but that wasn't nearly as like inspirational for me. So. And I found movies around the same time. I just fell in love with movies. My brother was a projectionist, actually. He's 4.5 years older than me. Oh. And in our town of Dallas, Oregon, where we had one screen in the winter inside and then one screen outside at a drive-in, he was the projectionist, so I got to see a whole lot of movies. And then VCRs came out when I was a sophomore, I think is when we got our first VCR. So I watched movies all the time. So I just fell in love with movies. So there used to be a thing called Theater Crafts Magazine. And in that it had like ads for all the colleges that had film programs. So I sent away to all of them to kind of, you know, get the information. And I was probably 13, 14 about this time. And I already knew that I wanted to go to film school. So I got them all back from all these different places. And the one I liked the most was State University of New York at Purchase. And the reason was, it was near New York, and I'd seen Fame, both the movie and the TV show, and thought it was the coolest thing ever. All these artsy kids and stuff. So I wanted to go to New York, not to LA. I'd been to LA before, and it just didn't feel like my vibe. But I didn't want to go to the city. I knew it would be too much. I grew up on a farm, you know, 106-acre farm, and went to this tiny high school. I knew, like, you know, dropping me in downtown Manhattan would like be too much of a. And what SUNY Purchase had was, it was a half an hour north, or driving time an hour, but outside of White Plains, and it was a very small school. It was only about 1,500 students.
Oh, wonderful.
And only like about 20 were accepted to each film class. So it was a small program within a small school away from Manhattan, but able to go to it when I wanted to on the weekends and stuff too.
So was it a liberal arts college in general? Or
so the SUNY system, there's about 40 different schools. I think there's actually more now, but when I was going, there was like 45 schools, and it was the arts school. So that was the only school I applied for, which in retrospect was a horrible idea. People tell me that you shouldn't do that, but I knew I wanted to go there. So, and I flew out for an interview in the end of my senior year, and did a red-eye flight in, and was completely kind of like a crazy man for my interview, which apparently helped me because they were a little like, we have to let this guy in or he may hurt us.
You know, 18 probably?
I was still 17 at that point.
Wow.
I hadn't graduated from high school, so I was a little younger. I didn't turn 18 till the summer. So by the time I got to school, I was 18, but for the interview, I wasn't. Went that fall to school in New York without knowing a single person in the entire state of New York. I knew no one. Wow. So it was a complete adventure, met some wonderful people, and, you know, kind of did the long road where I didn't do 4 years and out. I did a couple of 2.5 years and then took a leave of absence because I'd fallen in love with my wife. Well, she wasn't my wife then, obviously, and took some time off, and then she and I went back and was able to finish school. So it was a fascinating place. Nancy, my wife, did not like New York at all.
I went to visit New York City because I had a friend going to the Academy of Dramatic Arts. I thought, well, maybe this is a possibility for me. So I spent a week there staying at his place and had the days free to go out to New York. And I was kind of like you, only from a suburb in Colorado. And I was in culture shock. It was loud, it was fast, it was brusque, it was in your face, and not particularly clean. We're talking New York City at that time. So I just came away going, nah, that's not the direction I'm going. So, by the way, kids, VCR means video cassette recorder. Just kind of want to bring into that loop. That was the beginning of modern technology. Actually, it was beta first, wasn't it?
I think they were around the same time.
Yeah. And I don't even think you can buy a VCR machine anymore.
It is life-changing, though, because that was the first time where you could choose to watch a movie when you wanted to watch a movie. Mm-hmm. The only other way, and people forget this, even I forget this, the only other way to watch a movie was when it was on TV or at some sort of like revival house. Obviously, when movies were coming out as new, you could go see them. But if you wanted to see, I don't know, Star Wars, and it's 1982,
what do you do?
How do you do that, right? You know, you can't choose to watch it, but once VHS came out, you could like, oh, I'm going to program my own life and what I get to watch. And it was truly mind-blowing and totally life-altering for me. I think I would have loved movies in a way, but having that ability. So my local video store in Dallas, Oregon, had a deal where you rent two, you get a third one free. So there were a couple years there before I went off to school where I would rent 3 movies every night and just watch the movies back to back. And my parents, God bless them, were so understanding and so patient with me. They knew I loved it and they knew that was something that I cared about. But you know, their bedroom was right next to the living room where the one TV and the one VCR was. And I'm sure they got sick of hearing like horror movies running at like 1 o'clock in the morning. So yeah.
Maybe that's an obsession, I'm not sure, but actually it's that intense interest, you know. Music has that ability, you know, to do that as well. I hear stories about that, but that's interesting. The comparative is that you could, since the turn of the 20th century, with the gramophone, you could listen to music, but you couldn't, you know, anytime you wanted, but you couldn't watch a movie at home unless it was on TV. And I hadn't even thought about that. So we've come a long way. All right, so, wow. Forget the questions here. We'll get back to those questions later.
Or not.
Yeah, maybe not. So let's say, so you mentioned your wife, Nancy, who was not your wife at the time, but you met in New York, or had you known each other back in
So I was coming home every summer from school and doing children's theater at a place called Enchanted Forest right outside of Salem, Oregon. So a good buddy of mine, Sean Morgan, and the reason I actually ended up here in Santa Cruz, because he went to Cal Arts, and when Nancy and I moved to LA, he ended up hooking me up with a job. But so he and I were doing, I think it was our 3rd year of doing these wacky half-hour spoofs of fairy tales.
Were there tights and tunics involved?
There were. Yes.
Oh, perfect.
Okay. So I came home after my sophomore year to do that, and Nancy was in the cast with me. So it was Sean and I, Nancy, and a wonderful gal named Drea. And it was the 4 of us, and we would do 6 shows a day. You know, you do a half-hour show, get a break, and then do another one all summer long. It would work better because you do 2 different shows. First half of the summer was one show, and second half was another. It would have worked better if they were flipped, because the second half was Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs, and Nancy was Snow White, and I was Prince Charming. Wow. And that sounds like that's the perfect story, right? Yeah. But it wasn't. It was Jack and the Beanstalk, and I was Jack, and she was the Golden Goose. But I still kissed her on my very first day of meeting her, because there was a bit with, for some reason, Jack kissing the Golden Goose. And so it was, it was not a romantic kiss, it was a stage kiss, but I literally kissed my wife on the first day I met her, rehearsing for Jack and the Beanstalk. And I finally got up the guts to ask her out like a couple weeks before I ended up going back to school and before the end of the summer.
So then did she follow you to New York?
No, she had just graduated from high school,
Mm-hmm.
and she moved down to LA to become an actress, and I went back to New York for the first half of my junior year. And I called her all the time. We had huge phone bills. I took all the money that I was supposed to spend on film stock and stuff and flew out for one of the Jewish holidays for a long weekend, and visited her in LA. And at the end of the weekend, I asked, hey, what do you think about the idea of me maybe like taking a leave of absence and moving in with you? And she said yes, which was amazing.
Wow.
So I went back and did all the paperwork to take a leave of absence. I also had a teacher, my main teacher, a guy named Aram Avakian, who hated me. Literally hated me. He would throw lit matches at me in class. He would always call me Lantis, you F word, but he wouldn't say F word. And he was going to be my teacher for the rest of my career there. And I went to the dean of film and said, hey, he's just mean to me, and he's always picking on me. Oh, that means he likes you and he thinks you have potential on it. But I was miserable. So that had some influence on it as well. It was like, okay, I'm miserable at school because there's this guy,
Mm-hmm.
and the girl I've fallen in love with is 3,000 miles away. And so I ended up, getting a leave of absence, and right after the new year moved in. I got a call from my roommate from college about a week after I'd moved in with Nancy, and he was laughing. Art Kendall, love you, Art, was laughing and couldn't get it out, but Aram had died of a huge heart attack. So that's how much we all thought of him. So he was a miserable, miserable man.
And I remember working with people like that, directors, and many times professor directors. And I often wondered if they were frustrated because they didn't fulfill their professional dreams, and so they took it out of their students sometimes, I used to find a way to work with them, but I always told myself I will never, ever treat a student like that or an actor like that if I ever work with them. So you took a leave of absence, you joined Nancy, but then you went back and you finished and got your degree.
So
correct?
I was living in LA and worked for a lighting company, and she was working for a special effects company and doing some acting stuff. And I didn't like LA. At the time, I like it now, but I didn't like LA. We were living in North Hollywood, and this is 87, so it was pre any sort of fix up. So I was like, I'm going to move back up to Oregon and go to University of Oregon. And original plan was she was going to stay and I was going to move up there.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was kind of like potentially the end of our relationship. And I don't know what happened, but she decided, you know what, I'll go with you. And so we went to University of Oregon for a year, and then we both went back to college. And I finished up, and she did a couple years and was done with it. And so then we moved to Orlando, Florida. It's going to be the Hollywood of the East.
Is that what they were saying at the time?
Yeah. It was. They had just built Universal Studios.
Oh, okay.
And so there was going to be production there, which is true. There ended up being a lot more production than had been there previously, but they were bringing most people out from LA to shoot there. But it ended up being a good thing. Nancy did a reoccurring thing on a Nickelodeon show called Welcome Freshmen, which was one of these, like high school shows, and she went from being the bully a couple times in one season to the next season being the theater teacher, which is weird, different characters, but the same actress.
Oh, that's great.
And she got her SAG card doing a commercial. I think it was a commercial or something. I don't remember exactly. It may have been Welcome Freshman, but she ended up getting her SAG card in Florida, which was great because it's hard to get in LA. And then we moved to LA after almost 3 years of living in Florida.
You could pursue a profession.
Oh, absolutely.
Minneapolis, Kansas City, who knows? But I mean, you can do that anywhere. There is that thing of music, go to Nashville or Austin, LA, theater, LA, New York, but I think for young actors or artists, just know that, set your goals high, but just pursue wherever you are, right?
Yeah, and find your tribe, right? I mean, because definitely in Orlando, one of the coolest things was a group called the Performance that Nancy got involved with, very involved with, and they were amazing. They were all like native Floridians, most of them, but they did amazing theater, and it was great education for her on top of what she learned in school, and it was a great group of people. It was an exciting time actually to be in Orlando. This would have been 1990 to 93, the beginning of 93.
Yeah, and you know, it made me think that I've seen absolutely brilliant work in Denver. I've seen brilliant work, in Los Angeles. I've seen failures anywhere, and sometimes I think when you get a lot of money in a production, it means you can make something brilliant, or you can make something absolutely horrible, and spend a lot of money doing it. So again, I think it's a thing of don't minimize where you are. If there's a cultural scene, get into it, and the doors are open from there. And that maybe that brings us to the next thing, which is divergent paths and how you go, okay, well, this is not working, or opportunity just lands at your feet. And so, do you mind talking about that? What maybe got you into event production?
Sure.
Say, rather than your dream of film.
Well, and a little side note there. So we moved to LA for her to be a professional actress and for me to do film stuff because I'd gone to film school. And I got here and I just didn't like the film scene. It's a LA film scene is a whole lot of people standing around with a couple people working is what it felt like. And especially being in that startup role, right? You're the one working going, why are there 40 people here and they're all schmoozing? And that's just wasn't what I was taught in film school. I mean, New York film is a little different, and especially where I went to school, it was a lot of experimental and kind of documentarians. I always struggle with that word. So I was out here actually managing bookstores, which is oddly something that I had done in college as my kind of like augment job, and then did in Florida as well, worked in a bookstore in Florida. And so when I got out here, I was actually managing a Crown Books, which doesn't exist anymore. I miss them. And like I say, my friend Sean Morgan had gone to Cal Arts and was working for the city, and he invited me up to join the team on event production. So I started as a weekend warrior, as we now call them. We didn't call it that then. Working events starting in Cinco de Mayo of 1993. So I'm coming.
And this is in Santa Clarita.
This is Santa Clarita.
Valencia at that time, right?
No, it was the city of Santa Clarita.
Okay.
Yeah, it was already the city, and he was working for the city along with his boss. The full-time person was Michael Marks, who, of course, I went on to work with for a while. Yeah, and honestly, the film production that I was taught is very similar to event production. I mean, it's all about planning, and it's all about, producing is producing, whether it's an event or a film shoot. So a lot of the same skills actually served me well, and I was able to get to be a 30-hour-a-week part-timer, kind of in-office part-timer by 1994. And then I think it was 96 or early 97 that I became a full-timer event person. And loved it, and love working at the city. Great people then and now, just a great experience. But I wasn't necessarily feeling that creative. I was doing the event side of stuff. It kind of struck me that I wasn't doing art, creative art stuff, and an opportunity arose to go work for a local nonprofit where I could do the art side of things, and that's what spoke to me. It wasn't that I was unhappy with the city, but it was arts education, and it was a building that had an opportunity to be refurbished, and cool people that I'd worked with in my event role at the city, and they're like, hey, what would it take to come work for us? And that was Kimberly Wooten and Patty Rasmussen, and others, but mainly them, who had started Theater Arts for Children Foundation.
But a shift of focus can do so many things. It can maybe bring you into more opportunities because you hadn't been looking in that direction, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I came back after just a couple of years running the nonprofit, and they mean that nonprofit thing, a much better employee for the city, and a much more, I knew who I was more. I had grown a lot professionally because I had had to figure things out. And I knew the art scene out here more, and I made connections. And I was a much better city employee and probably a better person too. At the same time, because I wasn't doing as many events and wasn't tied up with so many weekends and evenings, Nancy and I were able to start our own theater company, Eclipse Theater. It was just Eclipse Theater then, it's now Eclipse Theater LA, and did productions down in West Hollywood. And so we'd done one show in '96 while I was still a city employee, with my friend Sean and Nancy and a third actor. And it went really well, and it was this tiny little 25-seat theater called Sierra Stage right off of Sunset Boulevard in West Hollywood. And we were like, oh, we should do more of this. And so in '99 and 2000, while I was working at Theater Arts for Children, we did 8 shows in 2 years.
So this was the birth of Eclipse Theater, and you started doing adaptations and originals?
Nancy created a whole one-woman show called Trailer Villa, which was 5 different members of a family that we ended up making a short film with her playing all 5 roles.
I've actually seen that, and I think it's brilliant.
Yeah,
and so does my wife.
I wish she would redo the one-woman show. She actually did 2 one-woman shows. She did Trailer Villa, and then a year later did Trailer Villa Christmas. And they were all monologues from these characters' point of views, and they were amazing. And I wrote, 3 originals and adapted just one, I guess, Greek show, which was the Charlie Manson version of the Bacchae called Blackbird. And so it was Charlie at Speck Ranch with all of his family members, female family members, acting out the show for him. It was a very weird interpretation, and we found the perfect Charlie Manson, which I'm still not sure if he really existed or not, because he kind of came into our life and then disappeared. And Nancy did this amazing Greek adaptation called Electra, I Hate My Mama and Stepdaddy, which is basically the Electra story done on a show like, we called it Larry Winters. No, it was more like Jerry Springer. We called him Larry Winters. So we had audience interaction, and it actually got an LA Weekly Pick of the Week, which back then in the 90s, that was a big deal. I mean, it was like the one show that week in LA Weekly that's like, this is what you need to see.
If there's anyone watching that is not familiar with the Eclipse, or this is the first time you met Phil, and Eclipse Theater has been going actually longer than I even realized, once you've told me this. But also, one of their strengths is the adaptation of Greek theater and making it palatable. Not that it's unpalatable, but palatable for the modern audience through humor or different take on those things. Am I right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's, I don't know why we struck on Greek theater, but I think they're classic tales, and you're not tied into the language like you often are with Shakespeare.
I want to talk about your writing, because I had the joy, literally, of working with Nancy as a director, and a show that Phil wrote called Appaloosa, and just a deep, moving experience. And Phil has the ability to, I'm going to put you on the spot here, wait until the last possible moment to create things. But then come out brilliantly. It's almost as if you thrive under that cocoon of pressure. Am I putting you on the spot by saying that?
No, absolutely true.
Because I remember you talked about the show and you said, yeah, we got to do it, and oh wow, our dates are coming up, and then all of a sudden you called me and said, hey, I'd like you to read for this, and you did it. How long did it take you to write Appaloosa?
Well, it took me basically 2 days, but really took me like 4 years, right?
Right,
so,
conceptually.
Right. And just to correct the record a little bit, I had been working on it in my brain, and we had talked about, I really want to do a show with you and Jim Sudik, who's a guy you did a show with in 1976 in Colorado.
Yep.
And Jim lives here and is an amazing guy. I love you, Jim. And I've always, we got to do a show with you guys acting together again, because you have some similar manner, I don't know, just a character thing that's like, no, they need to be. And so I was working on it in my head, and then the Maine had somebody drop out for their April show in December.
The Maine is a small 80-seat theater in Old Town Newhall, where many of the Eclipse productions are staged. Go ahead, please.
Suddenly there was this opportunity with a time frame okay, the middle of April, we're going to open for Cowboy Festival, which actually worked with, at the same time as our local Cowboy Festival, which actually worked with the theme of Appaloosa. Obviously, it's called Appaloosa, but it seemed like it would fit. So I had January basically to write the play. And I still hadn't figured out a couple things, and so I couldn't write it. I just couldn't write it until I figured out these couple of plot points, really more character relationship points. And then at the very end, I think it was actually the beginning of February, I think it was the weekend that went from January to February, I was like, all right, I'm out of time. And I just stayed up all night on a Friday night, wrote through that night, kept writing through Saturday, had it done before I crashed on Saturday night. And then I think we had a reading on Monday. And the reading was loose. We were able to fix some things, and especially Nancy was able to go in, and as she always does, she makes my stuff so much better, both in how she directs it, but also, hey, this doesn't quite read the way you think it does or whatever, and I'm not in love with my words. It's more the intention and the character that matters to me.
So I would like to address that point in the production, that in that production as an actor, I didn't feel constricted by the direction or the script. If there was something that I felt, that feels a little forced in that thing, I could bring that up.
It's collaboration, right? I mean, it needs to be collaborative, and at the end of the day, you as an actor in this case are going to be up there and need to own it, right? They need to feel true to you, and like I say, I'm writing in this fugue state in the middle of the night, which I think I have to do to get my editor voice to shut up. I think that's part of it, is I have to get to this point where I'm just like, and getting past that editor voice, because that editor voice is not great. Right?
The inner critic that stands in the way of so many good works, and I had a cowboy poet friend, real cowboy, who said about poetry, he said, don't get it right, get it written. And then you can go back and fix everything.
But yeah, I am a weird creator, because I have to have that kind of here's a time frame, and there's people relying on me. I can't just sit down and casually write, and I need to figure out, and I have not figured out yet how to do this, create that sense of urgency without having the severe need to have something written by that weekend, or the show in April wasn't going to happen.
That's another thing for young people out there is, when you're writing, is that let that critic voice take over. I'm not getting this written. Oh, I've lost my ability to write. A writer's block, and actually it's really about not surrendering to the critic,
Right.
but surrendering to the creative flow and letting it happen, and realizing this time will come. You can't ignore it, and you can't leave it alone. You do have to address it, but you don't have to destroy your confidence or your spirit over it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, and I'll tell you what. Once I'm in that zone, it's weird. It's. I don't want to get spiritual here, but it's not me at that point. It's voices talking through me, and it's the characters and whatever. And I know a lot of people have said this, but literally when I was writing Appaloosa, there was a point where one of the characters did something or knew something that I didn't know she knew. It actually solved a problem for me. It was your daughter's character, that she actually knew what you had done years and years before, because your mother had told her in dementia. And that was not in my brain consciously that was a piece for it, but her character was just not working. And all of a sudden, she put that out there. She said it, or alluded to it. She didn't even say it. Her character through me alluded to it. And honestly, I started crying, because it made me realize what her role in the whole show was in that moment. It really solved the show in a lot of ways, because that character becomes the person, the linchpin to being able to let the other characters get to truth.
What brought it to that point is that you dove in deep and you just started going for it, and then And then the problem solved itself. The character started speaking. I remember for the Cowboy Festival, this isn't about me, but it's a story. I had the assignment of writing a song about California history. And I'd been reading a lot of California history, always have. And there was a particular event that took place down near Encinitas back in 1846. The Army of the West, the Vaqueros, and the Californios clashed. And I knew that's what I wanted to write about. And then it took 3 months because it just became so big. I didn't know how to put that thing, war, into a 3.5-minute song. And then finally, it came up to about a week before the event. And I thought, I need to do it, I need to simplify. I'm going to put it through the eyes of one person that was there. Boom, it just took off.
Great song, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you.
I remember hearing it at that Cowboy Festival.
Yeah, and
being like, that's a good song.
Well, and you let yourself get into the character enough, and pretty soon they start talking to you.
Right.
Well, so Phil, this has been just wonderful talking to you again, and philosophizing as we often do. Some would say proselytizing. Well, Phil, it's been wonderful having you here. Once again, this is the Inside the Eclipse studio. It's an ongoing series where we talk to creative people, artists in the Santa Clarita Valley, actors, directors, writers, producers, etc. Say goodbye, Phil.
Goodbye, Phil. A classic. Thank you, Mike, so much.